9. The Savior Returns. Written by Celestial Rainstorm. Narrated by AJ the Elementalgod. Chapter 24. The Spy Machine's Final Skirmish. It seemed like no time passed as the clan ventured from the cavern and out into the emptiness once again. Seven led the way to the tower, skull pulled over her face, spear clutched in her hands. She had wrapped some old but thick gauze around her leg and arms to prevent herself from being electrocuted, as 9 was. The young man followed right beside her, blade in hand and holding the light staff high to glow the bulb guiding them through the mists that came with the dusk. His heart pounded with anticipation, body tense, ready for what was about to come. They soon reached the citadel. The spy machine had arranged a blockade of sharp, splintered wooden planks around the fortress, pointed outwards into the emptiness. This was obviously a warning. However, the Stitchpunks ignored it and carefully squeezed themselves through, heading for the huge cracked door. They skillfully and silently infiltrated the citadel, heading through the long corridors to where they knew the machines resided. As they peered around the corner, they saw the fabrication machine, creating another spider beast. There seemed to be an army of these little monsters, clicking and clattering menacingly as they scattered throughout the colossal room. The spy machine was lying on the marble floor nearby. Its head was down, and its crimson eyes seemed faded. In the talisman port of the fabrication machine was the other half of the orb, glowing bright cyan. So the spy machine had given up half its heart, just like 9 had planned. He touched his side where the talisman rested inside of him to reassure himself he still had it. He knew this was their last chance. 9 took the others and waved them back into the shadows. They hid themselves in the vast mists of kegs and barrels full of nothing but thick black gunpowder. The others were to keep an eye on the other machines, making sure 7 wasn't overtaken when she attacked the spying machine. The fearsome warrior waited at the entrance of the citadel. They were going to lure it outside to ensure the fabrication machine wouldn't be able to get any of them. The unstitched punk raised his blade and began tapping on the marble wall in a fast, even rhythm. The spy machine's head snapped up at the sound, its executed hearing picking up the soft tapping noise. It snarled, getting to its feet slowly and shakily. It began to circle the perimeter of the room, looking underneath each corner and crevice for the intruder. The monster tracked the noise to the hallway where 9 stood. He started darting backwards, continuing to run his blade all over the walls. He made sure he stayed out of sight, beginning to whisper to the machine to provoke it, to get it to come meet its doom. That's it. Over here. Come here, machine. Over here, he whispered, finally making it back outside. 7 stood on a crumbling pillar, crouching in the shadows and more than ready to drive her blade into the monster's neck. 9 then crouched underneath the pile of scrap metal, maneuvering carefully around his injury. The spy machine followed the annoying voice to the overhang, and it swung its long, sharp head down, its muzzle barely touching 9 as it realized the intruder was underneath there. 9 pressed himself as far back as he could, heart pounding as the razor-sharp teeth came closer and closer. The very tip of its metallic nose brushed his chest. He cringed, closing his eyes and leaning away as the jaw opened slightly. There was suddenly a vicious, echoing battle cry. The spying machine shrieked, and its head lunged up, destroying the overhang. 9 looked up to see 7 clinging to the machine's neck, her grip tight, and was incensed. This was enough. It was going to kill these little creatures once and for all, starting with the irritating female. Seven's spear gleamed as she raised it above her head. She knew that only one would walk away from this battle alive, and she was not going to go down without fighting until her last breath. The machine bucked and whirled wildly, throwing its body around and clearing in an attempt to throw the warrior to the ground. However, she was unfazed, as she kept her grip tight, refusing to let go. The spy machine screeched and activated a live electrical current that ran along its back. The warrior, however, was more than prepared. The gauze wrapped around her arms and legs staved off the initial shock. Acting quickly, Seven hooked her blade underneath the strange conduit woven throughout its spines. It wasn't a wire, but more of a line of pure energy. Nevertheless, with a great pull, Seven managed to slice through the band of energy. A bright flash filled the air as the machine's new power was abruptly cut off. It threw its head to the heavens and roared, all joints violently contracting and contorting as it was shocked by its own weapon. Seven felt a sharp buzzing shoot through her nervous system, but it wasn't enough to stop the warrior. She leapt off of its back as the machine threw itself into one of the stone pillars. She landed atop a pillar, crouching down and awaiting the next strike. Nine watched below in proud astonishment, as a crack of lightning suddenly seemed to set fire to the world, illuminating the silhouettes of Seven and the spy machine as it gave a shrieking roar up at her. She responded with a defiant scream of fury as she leapt into the air, sailing through the air and turning into a flip as she landed on top of its skull. She thrusted her spear forward, directly into the machine's damaged eye, giving a strong twist, pulling up and gouging the eye out of its socket. The machine screeched, an unearthly noise that mingled into the cracking lightning above. It snarled viciously as it threw its head to the side. It managed to throw Seven from its metallic skull, but she clutched onto one of its spines. As it swiveled around and tried to tear her to shreds, she met it with a swift swipe of her spear. The metals met with a resounding clang. The 7 others of the clan rushed outside, eyes widened as they watched the warrior and the machine, locked in battle in which only one would survive. Seven hooked one of the points of her spears on one of the bars of the underside of the machine's neck. She leapt and swung down, flying in a circle and landing once again on its skull. She raised her spear high above her head, and as she clung to one of its horns, ready to decapitate the monster that had nearly killed her 2 best friends and repaired the machine, it was going to do no more harm. Suddenly, the whole clearing seemed to be filled with blinding white light. A needle-thin, jagged bolt of lightning struck the earth, right next to the machine's claw. A plasmatic force was sent stumbling on its side, thrown off balance by the force of the blast. The sudden light blinded Seven, and she lost her grip. She tumbled backwards with a cry, landing flat on her back. Her spear fell from her hand and clattered to the ground. Before Seven could make a move to go for it, however, the machine slammed its clawed paw on top of her. It pressed onto her chest, immediately cutting off her breathing. The tip of its longest claw was driven into her neck. She cried out as she clutched at the claw, struggling to get them off her. Spots popped up in her vision as her body pleaded for air. She struggled fiercely, her reckless anger fighting against the panic, trying to overtake her. Her eyes closed as she let out a strangled, breathless cry, her grip slackened slightly. A sudden enraged and wordless scream echoed from across the clearing. Before the spy machine could react, a razor-sharp blade struck it right through the empty eye socket, nearly impaling it through the skull. It stumbled, shaking its head, as Nine nearly fell forward with the force of his throw. The claw that had been strangling Seven was lifted. She gasped frantically for air, coughing. She turned over on her hands and knees, struggling to get to her feet. However, the spy machine quickly recovered and snarled viciously, grabbing the female stitch punk with its claws. It reared up slightly, raising a swift and strong arm. Swinging its arm around, the metal whistled through the air. The machine flung Seven across the clearing with a deadly force. She flew through the air and collided into one of the wooden boards that surrounded the tower. The young woman fell to the ground, limp and lifeless, her battered form completely still. The machine seemed to smirk in satisfaction and smugness, giving a snort. It shook its head free of Nine's blade, beginning to creep across the clearing. Nine was looking on, horrified, as he saw his friend fall. The machine was going to kill her, if something wasn't done now. Thankfully, 8 had rushed forward and distracted the machine from getting to 7. Bringing his sword onto its side, it screamed and turned to fight 8. 9 seemingly tried to run for 7, knowing he had to get her as 8 distracted the monster. The pain roared angrily with him, but he didn't care. He wasn't about to let the machine, the person he loved most, die before him. Suddenly, one appeared at his side. He dropped his staff and wrapped fierce his claw-like fingers around 9's arms, holding him back, implying a painful pressure. "One, let go of me! I have to go to her! I have to get her!" he screamed at 1, writhing violently, eyes still locked on 7, who was still unconscious and motionless at the base of the board. She lay face down and didn't seem to be breathing. No, this can't be. She had to be all right. He had to get her, or he was going to lose her.
"There's nothing you can do without getting yourself killed. Stay here,"
1 commanded, trying to fiercely force him to the ground. As he struggled with the older stitch punk, 9 became angrier than he ever had in his life. He writhed violently in 1's arms, feeling his strength draining away. He was not going to lose 7, not while he was still alive. The spy machine then knocked 8 to the side. Infuriated, it turned back to the female, jaws open and about to snap down upon her. The woman 9 loved was about to be killed. A sudden surge of strength flowed throughout him. It seemed to leap up from his very soul, enveloping him within it. He felt nothing but his feelings for the female stitch punk fill him. It was just as 5 had said. It had given him the strength he needed, instead of taking it away.
"No! Let go of me!"
9 screamed, viciously. He heaved his entire body, giving his arms a violent jerk. He freed himself from 1's grasp and stumbled to the ground, but immediately ran toward 7. 1 stood frozen, staring after the young soldier, in belief and shock. It was that instant that he realized that how truly strong 9 was, despite his deadly injury, and how weak he plainly was. He was still going to throw himself in front of the unconscious woman to save her, even if it meant giving his life in the process. 7 woke immediately, becoming aware of the intense stabbing and pain of her neck and chest. She clutched her chest, straining for a breath. Her entire body shook as she tried to get to her feet, trying to find her strength. The spy machine was suddenly standing over her, its remaining eye bathed in crimson light. 7 reached out for her spear, only to discover it lying a few feet away. She couldn't reach it, and knew that if she moved, she would be ripped apart and killed. The two stared at one another, the machine waiting for 7 to make him grab towards her spear. Then a monster reared, towering over a small rag doll, despite being injured. Its menacing form stood silhouetted against the lightning piercing the sky. The little female's life was over. Her soul would soon belong to the master.
"Stay away from her!"
A horrible scream pierced the air. 7 jumped, startled. The spy machine whipped its head around at the noise, surprised as well. 7 never thought, not even with her wildest dreams, that 9 could emit such a terrible noise. Suddenly, he leapt in front of her, throwing himself between her and the spy machine. 9 standing above her protectively, holding his blade out of the spy machine, daring it to lay one claw upon 7. The machine stared down at him in both surprise and loathing. 9 swept his foot along the ground, pushing 7's spear to her. The spy machine snarled, standing still. Its glowing red eyes illuminated both 9 and 7. 9 took a step backwards, shielding 7 protectively. He held his hand out behind him, telling her to stay down. "When I say," 9 whispered out of the corner of his mouth, hardly moving his lips, still keeping his eyes locked on the machine, "pierce its heart." 9 and the machine stood staring into the other's eyes, waiting for one to make the first move. Both the young man and the machine were fighting to kill. "Now!" he whispered and jumped out from in front of 7, throwing himself to the ground. She reached with such a swiftness and force that the blade was nothing but a blur as she plunged into the heart of the machine, right through the protective metal sheet covering it. The energy crackled around the blade, and the machine screamed in agony. It stood on its hind legs, and they all cringed at how tall and largely it really was. Thin, thread-like blue lines crept from inside of its cavity and up to the body of the spy machine. The lines began to wrap themselves around the entire body of the machine. It screamed in torture, dropping back down on all fours. 9 rushed forth and dodged the spy machine's writhing body. He wrapped his fingers around the hilt of 7's spear and pulled it from its heart. The blade itself dripped with some sort of liquid-like energy. The spy machine managed to raise its claw and clip 9 in the side as he turned away, sending him flying. Then it reared up into the air once again, trembling violently. The threads of energy were literally slicing through the metal skeleton of the machine. Then it gave a final screech as its chest exploded. A shower of sparks fell to the earth. The machine's body swayed for a moment, eyes losing its glow as it fell backwards onto one of the towers of the citadel. A crack raced up the tower, giving off a resounding noise. The spy machine's eyes faded forever as it died. "9!" 7 cried as she ran to him. He lay on the ground, groaning in pain. She grasped his shoulder and held him up to his feet, keeping an arm around him. He could barely stand. He was so weak. Inside, the machine shrieked as it felt the other half of the orb suddenly disappear from existence. Those little creatures destroyed it. It was enraged, knowing that the time has come. It was at full strength. It had its own little army, and it still had its power source. It was time for the ragdolls that had held its creator's soul to die. Their souls in its possession forever. It started to jerk itself from the mechanics binding it to the citadel. The metal groaning and twisting, snapping and bending, it began to destroy the fortress in the process. Huge sections of the ceiling fell to the ground, the walls falling in on themselves. The machine then fell to the ground. Its connection slammed to the floor. It no longer needed it. The huge monster screamed and raised its spindly iron arms in triumph. It was now free, using its strong limbs to crawl forward like a gigantic spider. The fabrication machine shoveled its body through the entrance of the room. The archway shattered and sent stones crumbling falling to the ground. The machine screamed, ordering the army spider beast it had created to follow. The small machines immediately obeyed, following their master and expertly dodging the falling rubble. Suddenly, a large marble piece from the ceiling fell on top of one of the spider beasts, crushing it, instantly destroying it. Glistening sparks issued from its metal body, flying into the air, straight towards the stacks upon stacks of barrels filled with explosive gunpowder. It was mere seconds before the entire fortress was enveloped in a massive fireball. The area around gleamed with orange, yellow, and black. The explosion was enormous, and the force of the blast sent the 9 ragdolls soaring through the air. They flew over the boards, on the hill, and onto the clearing far below. The citadel crumbled behind them with a groaning, grinding crash, fire bellowing into the sky, ravenous flames seeming to torch the heavens. The 9 lay limply for a moment before they stirred. Their entire bodies were shaking. The twins crawled over to 6, who was laying on his chest, his eyes closed. They shook his shoulder gently, flickering to him and pleading with him to wake up. He then opened his eyes, slowly, and lifted his head, weakly looking up at the two. Are you all right? He asked them softly. They didn't answer, but hugged his shoulders gently. 5 sat up and shook his head, seeing 7 struggle to do the same. He rushed forward to her, helping her to sit up. She grasped her neck, grimaced at the sharp pain. Are you okay? He asked her, and she nodded, dazed, her neck still sore. Looking up, she saw 9, lying on his injured side, a few yards away from them. He was motionless and silent. 9! 7 gave a strangled cry of terror and leapt to her feet. 5 followed closely behind her. They ran towards 9 as fast as they could across the clearing. 7 fell to her knees beside him, turning him over to lie on his back. 9! She cried out his name in desperation, holding his head in her hand gently. He didn't respond. Oh no, she whispered in horror. 5 then appeared and gently pushed 7 to the side. The others watched, the twins covering their mouths with their hands in terror. 7 held her still friend's head away from the stony ground, sitting next to him closely and fearfully as 5 looked for signs of life. He bent down and touched the creek to his lips, trying to feel his breath. He also pressed his hand on his chest, feeling for a mechanical heartbeat. 9's breathing was faint, and his heartbeat fluttered and skipped, but both signs of life were all the same. 5 exhaled a sigh of relief, withdrawing away from 9. The young man hadn't given up yet. He's alive, 5 said to the group, although he looked at 7 and said it, as he said it. She gave a sigh of relief, taking his hand and holding it to her heart. The others gave a sigh of relief as well. The young man then stirred, his fingers trembling slightly, tightening around 7's hand, pressing the creak of his cheek to her palm. He took a deep, shuddered breath and slowly opened his eyes. He smiled weakly as 7 and 5 bent over him. We did it, he said thickly, managing to pull in another painful breath. Come on. You gotta let us heal you. Please, I can do it. 5 pleaded with him, but he shook his head, eyes closed once more. He clutched 5's shoulder and struggled to his feet, his knees shaking. There's no time. Look, he said, voice strained. He pointed over the hill as the crack of thunder boomed across the sky. The machine was crawling out from the wreckage, angry, and released from its bonds to the citadel. It crushed a small wooden box underneath next to the barricade the spy machine had constructed in front of the fortress, shrieking threateningly, making a straight line for it. The spider beasts all clattered and shrieked shrilly, ready to take down their prey. 9 struggled to his feet and grasped his pen blade tightly. He started up at the machine, knowing that it was it. This was the final battle, in which the future of the world and the Stitchpunk clan would be determined. The evening sky was quickly darkened with thick thunderclouds. This is it, 9 said to the coven standing behind him, over the sharp claps of thunder rumbling through the sky. This is our last chance to fight for our freedom and win this war. We can do it if we fight together and hold on to our hope. The Stitchpunk clan stirred up at the machines towering over them. Rain began to patter around them as the machine shrieked, raising a claw and ordering the spider beasts forward. The final battle had begun. End of chapter 24.